Hi, my name is Deon, and this is the Bullion Vault. Hi, Willem, how you doing?
Doing well, thanks, and yourself, Deon.
I'm good. So we're on episode 29, and it's been quite an interesting week. I mean, we've seen all the precious metals are up. I mean, from last week, gold was sitting around $3,300 an ounce, or just over. It's now gone to over 4,000, $3,400 an ounce. Silver's up again. I mean, last week we were looking at around 37, mid 37 range. It's now up to 39 in the early 39s, 20, 39s, 30. So we are coming closer to that 40 barrier. Platinum has been doing exceptionally well. From last week where it was on 1,400 or just over, it's now mid 1,400s. So it's quite an interesting time. And then the other factor, the rand has strengthened to the dollar, but as our pre-discussion, the dollars effectively got weaker to the rand, and then other currencies as well.
Definitely, yeah. We see the dollar weakening against, I think it was the pound earlier this week. I saw an article on that, and yeah, it just gives you an idea of more of where the dollar sits than where the rand actually sits at the moment. And looking at precious metals, I mean, you mentioned silver's approaching that $40 barrier, and as we discussed last week with Mike Maloney saying as soon as it breaches 40, it's got its sights on 50, and when it breaches 50, it's we don't know what's going to happen because that's unprecedented territory. So it looks like we're creeping closer to that.
And again, I think if we consider that this has been a long time coming, I mean, I know a lot of our clients will be saying, finally, you've been saying this for the last 3 years, 4 years, that silver would come good. And it has. The nice thing there is it's been consistent. The climbs aren't these massive spikes, and it's consistently moving up and in a very strong way.
Definitely. I mean, we have been since the start advocating silver, telling them, listen, there's going to be a boom at some stage. And this is the thing about precious metals. You need to be patient. You can't just decide, okay, I'm going to buy now because it's $10 lower than it was yesterday. And then I'm going to sell in a week or two when it's $10 higher or anything. That's if you want to do that, go and play the stocks by all means. But precious metals is more about that long term security, that preservation of your wealth, the hedge against inflation, the hedge against currency devaluation, and the like.
Yeah, and again, I saw a quote which I thought was quite interesting is, and when the institutions that print money are choosing gold over money, they print, what should you be doing? And it's quite a very poignant question because we look at all the reserve banks and where they generally would hold more cash or print more currencies into the economy, they're now actually leaning towards gold. And we've seen, I mean, I'm going to go through a little bit later. We're going to discuss the Buffett index because it's been quite interesting on where it's sitting right now. But there's definite shift away from money, and there's the definite shift to gold, and this is your institutional investors that are actually in the forefront of this trend right now.
Definitely. I mean, if we said it time and time again, your fiat currencies, the average lifespan is 27 years, I think. Gold has been around for thousands and thousands of years. It's literally been as long as human beings have been trading and dealing and buying and selling. Gold has been used. It's proven itself time and again. It's something tangible, which I think a lot of fiat currencies aren't. Oh, we're in trouble. Let's print our way out. I mean, look what happened during the COVID pandemic. Um, how many trillions of US dollars were printed, and it's not like they actually have value when they're being printed or increase the wealth of the nation. It's literally pieces of paper that they're assigning a value to, and unless the rest of the world and the rest of the people in that country assign that same value to those pieces of paper, they're practically worthless. I mean, look at the situation we had in Zimbabwe, where we had $100 trillion banknotes, and you couldn't buy a loaf of bread with it.
Well, you'd need a whole wheelbarrow to go and buy a loaf of bread, and it would be in the billions. In fact, in Zim money, I'm officially a trillionaire a couple of times over, which is probably worth about $10 right now.
Yeah, it's so yeah. That's the problem with just trying to print your way out of it. America is in a unique position where, they are the world reserve currency. They have that strength in their economy, and they can get away with it much better than other nations can. I mean, let's stick to the Zim example. You know, much smaller economy, small country, and it just led to immediate hyperinflation, where literally every minute prices were going up, not by one or two Zim dollars, but by one or two digits.
Yeah, and again, this is the trend. I mean, we know that the economies are really failing or faltering, for lack of a better word. But we look, and I mean, we've spoken about it at length, where the South African economy is not even in single digits; it's point of a digit that we in growth rates, and even then, it's quite stagnant.
Definitely. I mean, if we're looking at the South African economy, it's not looking very rosy, is it? I mean, we've had a budget deficit since 2007, 2008 financial year. So that's 16 years that, we've been running at a deficit. And over that time, there's an enormous debt that has been racked up. I mean, if we look at, where is this? 2008, 2009 financial year, our gross loan debt amount was 627 billion rand. End of 2024, it's 5 trillion. It's more than 75% of our GDP. And this is the problem, now going from that, this loan has to be repaid. It's as simple as that. Nobody gives you money for free, no matter what they say.
Well, if they do, I'd like some of that.
I think we'd all like some of that, but and this is the problem. It needs to be repaid firstly. Secondly, it needs to be repaid not in South African rands. It needs to be repaid in US dollars. And that is the biggest problem. Now, servicing this loan debt is costing us 424.9 billion in this current financial year. That's 1.1 billion rands a day.
Yeah, I remember for every rand we spend, basically 20 cents goes to reservicing the interest on our debt. If I think the figure is there and thereabout, but I know it's a fifth, literally, of what we actually needing is being covered on the servicing of those actual loans.
Definitely. And I mean, the other thing is, every time we get these figures like the 0.5% surplus, GDP surplus, if we factor in those debts, it actually turns into a 5% deficit. It's equivalent to 374 billion rands deficit. And this is the problem. Right now, we literally just got a new loan of, what was it? It's 26 billion rand to spend on infrastructure. Where was the loan? World Bank. Where's the World Bank? New York. I think it's New York. In the US.
It is in New
Yeah.
York.
Which means it's in US dollars.
And again, what's interesting, and I was also reading this morning, is we due for our review with regards to the FIC and that whole grey listing, and that's going to be in October. So we got 3 months. We're 3 months away from that. They say that we've kind of got all the points about money laundering, and we know how, even as a small company, how arduous it's been on our own processes, that we've had to have someone dedicated full time to just get through the paperwork, which again isn't constructive to a business that's really focused on producing revenue. That we actually been sucked into a lot of this paperwork. Doesn't mean that we're going to get an extension on that FIC, that we remain grey listed, or should we come better? I don't know. Again, my feeling is, and from what you're saying, is we're not there yet.
Yeah, it's the first problem is the debt. The second problem is, I don't know, do we call it corruption, or do we call it just mismanagement of funds? We're looking at something like the new license card printing machine. The one we have is decades old. It's breaking down constantly. I think it's cost something like 4.4 million rands over the past few months just to keep it running. Then they said, okay, now we're going to buy some new ones. So here's a budget of 500 million. And the next thing we know, there's a 900 million rand deal already signed. And it's not like we're talking a few bucks here or there. This is 400 million rand.
Well, it's short of half a billion.
And that's the type of thing that we're struggling with. It's how did it get from there to there? And who is approving all of this?
And if you consider that the DG, which is the Director General, needs to comply to the PFMA, which is the Public Finance Management Act, and in that they've got to make sure that everything's approved, that there's no fruitful and wasteful expenditure, and so on. And yet, what's insane is a lot of what you're saying, a lot of these deals where they should have actually come out at this. We look at Eskom's, a perfect example. They budgeted X amount to build the power stations. That ran over in the billions and was still not completed on time and ran over time on, I think it was more than a decade. So again, we got all the systems in place and we complying to all these things, but it's not translating to actually working. And again, as you say, it's this eroding of the actual real rands and cents that is the problem here.
Definitely. I mean, if we look at it, since 1970, the rand has lost 99% of its value. Basically, if you had 100 rands in 1970, then you would have 1 rand today. And, when I originally read this, I said, no, that can't be right. Come on. And then I actually sat down and I thought about it, and it kind of makes sense. When I was a kid, I remember the 2 rand coin had just come out, and I picked up a 2 rand coin at the tennis courts, and I thought, wow, I'm rich. And I went to the tuck shop and I bought out the place with 2 rands. And I mean, this was in, the sort of end 80s, just before the 90s. So it's not even that long ago. But if we look at it now, we are sitting with a currency that, in some senses, it's doing all right. If you look at something like the Big Mac Index, we've discussed that as well. If you look at something like the patented Theron iPhone Index, then we're not doing all of that well.
Yeah.
But now the problem is, we've got this devaluing currency, we've got this rising debt, and where does the money come from to service that? It unfortunately falls on the taxpayer.
And we know what happened there, where they were trying to add an extra percentage on VAT, a value added tax. That got kicked back, and then they said, okay, 0.5%, and that also got kicked back. But we can see that at the end of it, we as civil society do pay. We do pay these bills. And yet, what's even more concerning as civil society, we can kick up a fuss about these things when it matters. Yet that same action to get government to account on all this wasteful and fruitless wastage is not being taken to book or to task.
Definitely. I mean, we were talking about the obvious ways that they're trying to get that revenue, which is, as you said, the VAT that they wanted to raise. But, it's they're a bit smarter than that. There's I don't know if you've ever heard of bracket creep in the tax system. So essentially what happens is, beginning of the tax season, they announced that there'll be no adjustments to the new tax season. So all of the tax brackets and rebates and everything will remain the same as it has last year. And we think, okay, no big deal. But what happens is, because people have been getting raises to keep up with inflation, to keep up with the growing cost of everyday life, their salaries get higher, they get pushed into another tax bracket, and they end up actually paying more and taking home less than they would have if they had stayed at their old salary. And just because there was no adjustment to the tax bracket for the 25-26 just
Financial year, yeah. 24-25, yeah.
And now, just because there was no adjustment to the 24-25 financial year, they're saying this will add up to 15.5 billion of tax revenue for the government. So you can see how you might not even realize it. You might think that raise I just got at work is a brilliant thing, but in the end, all we're doing is paying back the money that government owes.
Absolutely. And I think that is something that all governments do. Some are a little bit more obvious about it, and others utilize the ignorance of the masses to pursue this way of doing things.
Definitely. I mean, they rightly say only 2 things are certain in life: death and taxes. And it's not that I'm saying, oh no, there shouldn't be any taxes. Of course, there should be taxes. Where does government get money to build a road, to build a hospital, to build a school, to pay teachers, etc., etc.? And that's what the tax is for. It's how that tax money is used and utilized that is the problem.
Yeah, and again, I mean, I think we also, you talk about revenue, and this is kind of going on to the next thing that we wanted to discuss is, we are part of BRICS, which is the Brazil, Russia, India, China, and the small S, South Africa. We are part of that bloc. We've been in consultation with the US about trying to avoid the tariff increases. It looks like it hasn't worked. So we're looking at about 25 to 30% being added to all products going into the States. We've had a discussion on that. And then again, the US says straight away that any country, all countries that are associated or aligned to BRICS will be treated differently because they're not aligned to the US and US foreign policy.
And right there, we have the reason why BRICS was formed and why they were talking about creating a new BRICS currency is to get away from the US dollar and its dominance in the world market and the fact that the US can wield the dollar as a weapon. It's as simple as that. It basically comes down to do as we say or else. And it's not, they're not going to fly over here and drop their tanks and their weapons. They're just simply going to weaponize the dollar through sanctions, through tariffs, etc., etc. And you know, that's the problem. Is so many countries are actually vulnerable to that. If you take a look at a bunch of the smaller economies, they are very very vulnerable to the US actually doing something like that. I mean, right now, I think it's Lesotho is absolutely devastated simply because the US has levied an insane tariff on everything coming from them. And what comes from Lesotho? Mainly Levi's jeans. And that's their main industry. That's the biggest thing keeping that little country running. And now with the US tariffs coming in, they are absolutely devastated.
And again, I mean, it's clear that the markets that will yield to the US demand are your emerging economies. Like they said with China said, cool, let's go. And we'll put tariffs on you. And then suddenly the US, no, hold on, let's rethink that. So again, the bigger economies can tolerate that, or they can refocus themselves. It's, as you say, it's the smaller economies that are quite desperate, firstly, for the revenue, and secondly, don't have multiple streams of revenue in various different markets.
Definitely. But I mean, it's not only the small economies. Recently, we've seen the I in BRICS, India, suddenly pivoting, saying, no, 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 we don't want a BRICS currency anymore. We want to carry on using the dollar. And, obviously they're trying to do what's right for their economy. And to them, that means embracing the US dollar and sort of shunning the BRICS alliance a little bit.
Well, I'm smiling because if you are in the States and you call any call center, a lot of the time the call center is based in either Sri Lanka or India, and they are servicing that whole economy or a population. And it's interesting that you say that about the India. It makes a lot of sense because they are reliant on a multiple amount of industries are reliant on the US.
And it's quite funny that, um, the US is fighting against the economies to which they've outsourced all of their manufacturing, things like call center. A lot of jobs and industry was outsourced to these countries like China, like India,
Taiwan.
Taiwan, all of those. And now they're putting tariffs in place to get that manufacturing back.
Yeah, and again, we've been down that road, and it was one of the previous episodes where we said the concept of what they want to try do makes sense, but when you've had decades of infrastructure that's been removed, to try reestablish that infrastructure is going to take a long time. And that's part of the problem here is they want the result from the idea, yet there's going to be a lot of pain to get to that.
Yeah, and it's the we and now we're back to the case of Well, do we bow to America's demands, even though they make up something like 6% of our trade, international trade? It's not that simple to just say, oh, but they're not even one of our biggest trading partners. Because the US is the only one with whom we actually have a big surplus.
Yeah.
You know, most of the trade with the BRICS currencies has led to massive, massive deficits, and that's where the issue comes in. Um, it's not about the amount of trade, but rather where's the money coming from?
Yeah. So interesting. I mean, it's an interesting time that we're sitting in, and there's so many things pivoting. On that, I mean, any other further thoughts on BRICS?
Um, well, yeah, it's as you know, the 10% extra tariffs to be slapped onto any country that aligns themselves with BRICS. I don't know exactly what's going to happen. One of the biggest partners is now shying away from a BRICS currency. We've got a ton of little partners coming in, but you know, at the moment it seems a little bit fragile to me.
Again, and like we talk about American policy with the tariffs and the reason for it is I can understand the reasons why with the creation of BRICS, because there were a handful of Western countries that had the say of global politics. And if they didn't like anything to do with climate change, reforming their climate policies and that, they just ignored them. And yet they would then load a lot of pressure on countries that were not part of that G8, or and that's where the problem really lies, is it was forced the likes of China to start to actually say, hold on, how do we firstly topple the strength of the dollar as the reserve currency globally, and then secondly, how do we start to actually look at starting to leverage some more influence across the globe, like the dollar, like the US have had for so long.
And a big part of that is gold,
Yeah.
because gold isn't like paper currency. It can't be devalued because of overproduction or overprinting or anything like that. It's held its value. In fact, if we look at the gold price going up or something like that, the gold, silver price, etc., going up, in reality, it's not actually the gold price going up. It's the buying power of fiat currencies eroding.
Inflation,
Inflation, yeah.
essentially. And that's where gold is just aligning itself to the loss in the actual the the actual value of those currencies. But just out of that, and I'm just going to go into it quickly because it was actually came up yesterday, where the Buffett indicator has hit an on a point which is over 209, well, exactly 209%. And basically, how the Buffett indicator works, and they talk about that it's flashing red. In other words, this is concerning. We need to start relooking at things, and we know that Warren Buffett is probably one of the greatest investors of all time. He's managed the
Hathaway Berkshire.
he's managed the Berkshire Hathaway fund for all these years. His old mate Charlie Munger died recently, and they've been able to literally steer their portfolio and their fund through some very trying times. The 2009 and 8 dot-com crisis, the financial crisis there, and so on. And he's never been a fan of gold. But what's interesting is the Buffett indicator basically takes the total US stock market divided by the GDP. If you look at the US GDP right now versus the stock market, it equals 209%. Now, what's quite interesting is at 120%, generally what they say that stocks are overvalued. And then they say that, and literally this is around 2008, that it hits 140%. And that's where they start to talk about that a bubble, or the bubble territory. In other words, there's a mass overvaluation, and that's going to cause a sudden change. And if we look at, for instance, the S&P 500, which has been hitting all-time highs, the interesting thing there is it's a handful of companies that are propping up the S&P 500, and the smaller companies are actually not doing that well. But the big problem here is it's not broad-based strength of those companies within the S&P 500. But so this is where we are, and the Buffett indicator also shows a lot of things that are quite interesting. Is that, for instance, even for Warren Buffett's fund, it is cash flush. In other words, it's holding a massive amount of cash. But we know that, as you've just mentioned now, the cash is devaluing at a rapid rate. He's never been a fan of gold. We know that he had bought into silver a couple of years ago in the mid 2000s. But there's definitely, and this is what they're saying, is when the likes of a Buffett starts to look at gold or mining stocks or gold related stocks, we're going to see that shift. And we've already spoken about the growth of gold. We've seen how from an institutional investors they're already taking up gold, and this is that next knock-on effect that we get someone like Buffett now coming in with it, where his indicators saying, "Listen, this is new territory. To be at over 200% is a problem."
Yeah, and it's there's other economists also who just come out and say the end, everything points to the fact that there's evidence of the end of the fiat currency is coming. And now the question is, what happens then? What's going to be the new currency? Is it going to be gold? I mean, is it going to be precious metals? It seems a little bit primitive if you really think about it. Is it going to be cryptocurrency? I mean, one big crash and the world is bankrupt. So, what's going to take its place? And it's an interesting sort of line of thinking to follow.
Well, this is the other thing is bankruptcies in a medium to large companies within the US for 2015 has been at a 15-year high. So that's concerning. That's that soft underbelly that I'm talking about, the S&P 500. That suddenly you look at all these tech stocks and they're doing so well and they're carrying that whole S&P 500, yet the stocks below that. And we have, to a degree, spoken about this in 2020 when they had the quantitative easing and they were pushing a lot of money into the economy. We did it in South Africa, they did it in the US, they did it around the world to stop their economies from collapsing. But what it essentially did is it also showed that a lot of these economies and companies were actually doing okay, and yet they weren't actually producing. And this is where I'd already said that the soft underbelly, that the grounding was already a concern even then.
Well, I think this is perfect evidence of the tariffs. You know, we speak about the tariffs, we speak about the damage it's going to cause to South Africa, but this is unfortunately what's happening in America, and this is happening to American companies with American people working. It's exact opposite of what they're trying to do. Instead of getting their goods at X amount, now they get their goods at X plus 30, X plus 40, X plus whatever the tariff is in the country that they're getting it from. We've already said there isn't a lot of manufacturing happening in America at the moment, not to the scale of which the government there would like it to be happening, and they're trying to force the manufacturing back to America through these tariffs, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight. We've talked about that already. It's going to take something like, I don't know, a decade maybe to get all of the manufacturing back to America, to build the facilities. It's going to cost trillions of dollars to get it all up and running. And before that happens, there are thousands and thousands of companies that are going to go under, thousands of people who are going to become unemployed. It's simply just not that easy.
Well, what's quite interesting here is that the US will have to come up with another $30 trillion in the next 4 years. And again, we know that the way of being previous that it has been done or is being done is to just push more cash into the economy. What does that do? That has a knock-on effect on inflation, devaluation of currencies. So it's this vicious circle that's winding down and going deeper and deeper. We look at the DDP, debt to GDP ratio in the US, it's over 130% right now. So things are concerning. We are at a point, especially in the US, and we've been talking about this for a while, that there has to be some market correction slash depression, recession on the cards. And I think where we are right now, it's probably starting to show the early days of it.
Yeah, I think things are going to get very interesting quite soon.
Well, what's interesting is that cash is already losing purchasing power to gold by 22% per year in the US. In other words, and we spoke about that in rands, that loss of value where it's actually not gold strengthening, it's the loss in actual value of the currencies that's been highlighted there.
And yeah, as you said, it's this spiral black hole effect of once it starts, eventually it's just going to go faster and faster and faster. Things are going to get more expensive more quickly. Who knows? Might end up with hyperinflation in all of these major economies, which in turn will make their currency absolutely worthless.
Well, and again, this is where and I'll go back to it, is where they've spoken at length, a number of market commentators, about the Great Reset, or this great market reset slash depression that is imminent. And again, we've looked at it over the years, and like we said with silver, at some point it's going to happen that silver would strengthen and go the way it's gone. Realistically, we can't, as far as globally, the monetary policy of a lot of central banks needs to be reformed, or we are staring upon some recession, depression, and the scale of that will be massive. However, and they've shown this already, that if you are holding gold, hence why are reserve banks buying gold? Why are they stocking up on gold? Why are they even taking out future contracts on gold deliveries? Why? Because they are uncertain of the economies and the performance on the economies, and the only way they can protect it is by buying gold.
And we've seen that time and time again. Gold is a hedge against inflation. It gets your money out of fiat currencies. No matter where you take your gold in the world, you're going to get the value of that gold in the local currency, whatever that might be. So yeah, it's sort of a bit of an equalizer, and it's one thing that great economies like the US can't weaponize because they can't say, okay, well, your gold is now worthless. It just can't happen.
Well, you talk about weaponized. The other way out of this is to create war, where there's geopolitical tensions. And again, that is what we're dealing with here right now, is the US, South Africa. There are literally, I don't think there's an economy that's actually not in this position. And if something doesn't change, they're going to start to lean more towards it, because that's a good way of firstly generating revenue, building up your actual reserves. Is let's go to war. And I know it sounds very simplistic, but the reality is that's what happens.
Yeah, and I mean, geopolitical tensions already are insane. We've got issues in the Middle East, Iran, um,
Israel and Hamas, yeah.
and we see all of these. We've still got Russia, Ukraine. It's I think a lot more tense than most people realize. I think it's a lot more volatile than people realize, and we're not hearing about it as much as we should, simply because we're tired of it.
Yeah.
How long has the Russian-Ukraine war been going on? We don't care about that anymore. We're tired of it. And the other thing is that as soon as political tensions pick up, the value of gold goes up.
Yeah, and again, I think that's the really underlying thing here that we're really highlighting, is the buffer indicator, the clear sign that it's red flags, warning that things are not right, over 200%. Things need to change. You look at historically, even at levels at 140%, there was concerns, or it triggers various events within the economy. So you then look at South Africa, we look at where we are, and as you mentioned, this desperate need to create more revenue, yet the infrastructure, and we've always gone on about this, is at a macro level, or a micro level more specifically. So your municipalities and that, a lot of them are not running to capacity. I know of this, and I know of people that do work in government, where they don't even go into the office, and yet government is the biggest employer in this country.
Yeah, It is a bit of a troubling situation. I mean, as you said, people not going into the office, people sitting in the office probably doing nothing. I don't know.
Well,
I
and
think
this is an absolute fact that also what they do is they go into work at around 10, 11, and this is happening every single day, and they go have a bra, and they'll bra and they'll get drinks, and then they'll go home and they press play, repeat, press play, repeat. And I know this of absolute fact.
yeah, well, the thing is, it makes the South African government seem awful, but it's not just us.
I know.
It's across the world. I mean, if you look at the amount of government jobs that was cut, let's go back to, I think it was the Clinton era. It was hundreds of thousands of government jobs that was cut. But the way it was done resulted in a booming economy. And that's the thing, if you could trim it down, if we can get this massive debt of ours back on track by just removing unnecessary expenditures like 400 million extra for this contract, 200 million to go in my pocket, or whatever the case might be. And as I said, it's not that we're trying to pick on South Africa, really. We're not. I love this place. I love this country.
Yeah.
It's just this is happening across the world, and it's just contributing to this decline
Yeah.
across the world, this decline of the global financial situation.
Yeah, and again, this is why we even doing this podcast is we are a big believer that people need to take their wealth or portions of their wealth out of currencies, out of investments, and put them into gold, put them into bullion. It's proven the fact that central banks are buying, the fact that there's this happening throughout the world. And I've always said, pay attention to what the big boys are doing. If they're buying gold, your central banks, why aren't you?
Definitely, once again, the Kindle Bergaminsky model of booms and busts. You know, the institutional investors are the ones who pick up on where this is going. It's their job. They've got people being paid millions of dollars to figure out what's happening. And if they say, now's the time to buy this, then that's the time to buy it. Don't wait until everybody's doing it to get into it, because then you're going to lose.
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
I think we are in for an interesting time ahead. I don't know where this is going to go in the next few years. On a global level, on just the South African level, it's concerning.
Yeah, it is. And again, we I've got children, we got families, we have responsibilities, and I think that's throughout the world. So as the man in the street, and again, I cannot emphasize even more the reason to be looking at gold, to be looking at bullion as a hedge against a lot of these concerns. It's tangible. If there's a complete crash in an economy where we go to an apocalyptic world, there's still value in a piece of gold. There will be. Not to say that I believe that, but we have clients that do, that firmly believe that we are going to a complete fall down. But if there is a massive recession slash depression that the world is sunken into, gold overnight will go from where it is now to probably 10 times its value. And people that are holding gold will realize that real value in that short period of time.
Yeah, I think the main thing here is that it is tangible. It is
Yeah.
an asset you can hold in your hands. It's something that you can own. It's not something that is sort of the value of this piece of paper is being decided by powers across the world. It is a tangible piece of wealth that you can hold, that you can own, that you can pass on one day.
Willem, thanks a lot for your time, and we'll chat next week.
Definitely. And if you enjoyed the content, be sure to subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, and we'll see you guys in the next video.
Take care.